Yeah, this is better.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Denise Ward, and I am the guest curator here at Petaluma Arts Center for this art show, Black Artists of Northern California. And part of this program, I wanted to have more than just paintings and sculpture. I actually wanted to have written word. So I selected these two artists that are going to present some wonderful conversation this afternoon, Natalie and Eirinie.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, see? Anyway, this afternoon I'll give you a little bit of background on both of them. Miss Carson lives here in Petaluma. She has 2 children, and she has been a frequent contributor to Mother Magazine. She's appeared in Lit Hub, Mortal Mag, Electric Literature, the Sonora Review, and others. She was an NEA Distinguished Fellow at the Hambridge Center and is 2024 alum of the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. She contributes to our local paper, and her column is called Eirinie Asks. She writes about motherhood, she writes about relationships, and we've got her book here today, The Dead Are Gods, critically acclaimed by Oprah Daily, Nylon Magazine, Shondaland, and the Washington Post, as well as winning the Zibby Award. She's also named as one of Kirkus's reviews of Best Books of 23. She's currently working on her first book of fiction, a maternal Gothic story that challenges the notion of types of mothers we want to be versus the ones we actually are. It's called Blood, Fire, Baby. Miss Natalie has her MA in Afro-American Studies from UCLA. She's a graduate of the Warren Wilson School of MFA programs for writers. Her book, Queen Sugar, was named one of San Francisco Chronicle's best books of 2014, and she was nominated for an NAACP Image Award. She resides in San Francisco, and at the Raglan Foundation, the Virginia Center for the Arts, and you've been to a lot of residencies, haven't you?
Yeah.
Derazi's Residence Arts Program and the Hedgebrook Program. Her nonfiction work, which is one of my favorite books, appeared in Lenny Letter, The Bitter Southerner, Oh, the Oprah Magazine, and Rumpus. We Are Each Other's Harvest is what the book is called. It's about black farmers in America and all of the trials and tribulations they've gone through. Black farmers just were awarded $2.2 billion in restitution this last week for all kinds of weird practices from ag organizations all over the country. Anyway, for 2 years she was a writer in residence at St. Mary's College, where she taught a fiction workshop in the MFA program, huh?
That's right.
Wow. Mm-hmm. She's a member of the San Francisco Writers Grotto and lives in San Francisco. And her newest book that she's in process with right now is called Good People. Ladies and gentlemen, my writer.
Hi. Such a treat to be here with you. I should mention that while we don't have Natalie's book physically in the building with us, I have QR codes that me and my children painstakingly printed and then cut and stuck. So they're handmade, and you should really absorb and use those. Thanks for coming up to Petaluma.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for
Thank you. This is such a treat. I feel like we were back eating lunch and just
talking.
Gabbing.
Yeah.
I wish we could have just brought that conversation out.
Maybe we will.
Maybe we will.
Yeah.
So your first book, Queen Sugar, was kind of this runaway success. Do you feel like is that fair to say? Did it feel that way when it was happening?
It was a 14-year in process runaway success.
Yeah,
That's
we have to remember that
the
the book process doesn't start when it gets released.
No, it starts way before that. So, I mean, it ended up having its life out in the world, first as a novel and then as a television show that ran for 7 seasons. And that was a great experience. I was not directly involved, but just seeing my work out in the world was pretty spectacular.
That must have been, I think about that often, what it would look like to see visual representation of your words. Is it trippy to see that?
It's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. You know, I think, well, you know this. We work so long and so hard laboring to make something out of words, you know, laboring to make a world out of words and craft people out of worlds so that they feel real. And then they live in you. You know, they have a shape and maybe a face and a voice and a personality. And then they get out into the world and you have somebody else's idea of what those characters look like.
And you can't control that.
And you can't control that. And you're like, oh, that's an interesting choice. Or, oh, that's exactly what I was thinking. So it's fun. It's a fun experience.
Where did Queen Sugar start for you? Do you remember what the kernel of the idea was?
So, well, I'll take a step back and say Queen Sugar, if you don't know the book, is the story of a young African-American woman who lives in LA, who, when the book opens, has discovered that she has inherited 800 acres of land, sugarcane land in South Louisiana. And so she picks up with her little daughter, who's about 11, in tow. She leaves Los Angeles, and she moves down to this tiny town in South Louisiana. And the story is, you know, her being born as a Westerner, having to learn how to be a Southerner. She comes from, you know, Los Angeles, having to adjust to small town life. She moves in with her grandmother, and then it's a story. It's really the beginning of this journey that I took about answering this question, or maybe asking the question about the connection between African Americans and land in this country, and what that means, and what that has meant, and thinking about what land means to all of us as Americans, you know, the narrative around that. So those were some of the stories that I was explaining, or those were some of the themes that I was exploring in the book. And ultimately, the question for the book is, you know, is she, Charlie, able to learn how to be all of these things and save this farm? Or does she lose the farm? And, you know, she has a half-brother who has not inherited any land at all, so it's also a family story, and it's a lot of things. And the idea, to answer your question, it started as a short story.
Did it really?
It really did, yeah.
Was it called Queen Sugar?
No. The story was a story that I wrote many, many, many years before I even came up with the idea for the novel. And I'd be very curious to hear from you about this. You know, sometimes as an author, as any kind of creative, you get an idea. Sometimes you hear something that sparks your imagination. Sometimes you see something and it kind of triggers a thought. In this case, for me, I just had this idea. I kind of saw this vague picture of a man and his son, and I knew that they were driving around Los Angeles in their car. That's all I knew. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So the short story was really about answering the question about who were this father and son? What was their story? Why were they in this car? I wrote the short story. This was many, many years before. And I kind of wrote it and tucked it away in a drawer. And then years later, my grandmother passed away. And my grandmother was from a tiny town in South Louisiana. And my husband and I and our little daughter at the time went to her funeral. And as I was sitting there in the pews during the service, and I'm watching this parade of, you know, townspeople come to my grandmother's funeral, and I'm looking at them, and they looked like characters out of a book. You know, just the way they were dressed. They had, and of course in a tiny town, you know everybody. And so my family members are introducing me to these people. They're like, oh yeah, that's Screwneck. Oh yeah, that's Buzzard Gravy. All that's, with these crazy nicknames. And it occurred to me that the man and the son, the father and son that I'd written about years before, they were from this town. And I remember thinking, oh, I think I have a novel.
Oh, wow.
And that's
amazing.
the way it began. Yeah.
That's incredible.
So but I would love to hear from you about the creative process and how you how you had the idea to write your memoir. And because you're living your life,
Yeah.
but then something happens.
Yeah.
And you decide, oh no, I have to explore this in another way. I'd love to hear from you how that.
Well, I did want to touch on the fact that it's so interesting to hear another writer talk about characters. I think some people, I definitely did before I started writing books, think about stories as being made up. You make them up. You are developing plot points and things like that. But often, as you found out, you're just discovering things about these people who have full lives. They're just not known to you yet.
Right, yeah.
There is this kind of beautiful like uncovering of a story. My memoir, The Dead Are Gods, is a book about grief and loss and what love looks like after death. My best friend died almost exactly 6 years ago. In the beginning of October, it will be 6 years. And it was funny because I'm a college dropout, which made me think that I've always been a writer, but I didn't think that I could call myself an author or a writer until I had an MFA or I had put in hard years and hard loan costs into my education. My girlfriend who died, Larissa, was always like, shut up, you're a writer. Like, you're writing, you're a writer. And when she died, I wrote the eulogy for her funeral, and I just didn't stop there. It just continued for me. And so there is something kind of bittersweet about my book in that it exists because she died, but also I have gone on to do amazing things that I maybe couldn't have done without the book. And so it feels like, although her death is awful and sad, and I miss her, and I would trade it all in a second, it feels like fertile soil to have been given this through something so painful and hard. So that's where that came from for me. And that's a difficult thing too, because memoir, and especially when you're writing, yes, it's my life, but also about someone else's life. There's a lot of like ethical and moral quandaries about where is appropriate to stop. Right. But for me, yeah, that one kind of poured out of me. But my second book came out of postpartum with my last baby, and I had similar feelings to you and your grandmother's funeral, where I kind of had a moment. I was at an impasse with the book, with the manuscript. It just wasn't happening, and then I realized, oh, I'm looking at it completely wrong. This is actually what this character is about. But I find that so fascinating.
Yeah. And I think it's a matter of trusting your instincts, or maybe not instincts, but impulses. Yeah. And if you have an idea, saying, being curious and being willing to follow where that goes.
Yeah, because there's a lot of documents on my laptop that did not make it to the book. It's good to explore those things.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit about what is expected from Black art and Black artists, and how does that differ from the things that we want to make? I feel like in a world where Black art is being disenfranchised and underfunded across the board because it's no longer as chic as it was in 2020, I wonder if you feel any of that pressure to kind of create art that fits into a certain ideal.
Yeah. I grapple with this all the time.
Oh, that's nice to know.
Well, and here's the thing. So I'll give you a concrete or specific examples. So when I was writing Queen Sugar, for example, there are characters in the book. For example, the main character, Charlie, is a single mother. She's a widow. Her half-brother, Ralph Angel, who is kind of the antagonist in the book, has had some addiction issues. And I remember there being moments in the early iterations of the book where I felt a tremendous obligation. I was worried about putting those characters out into the world because I felt such an obligation to my community to create characters who were positive, who were not flawed in these ways that, you know, I was aware that could be portrayed as stereotypical. And I'll be honest when I say I got to the point where I actually could not write them because I was so worried about, oh my God, what are Black people going to say if I have this book and I have these problematic characters? Or, you know, what is a wider audience going to think if they read this? And it got to the point where I could not write anything. And I remember sharing that fear with my graduate advisor at the time. And he said, just write the book. Just write the book. Let the characters be who the characters are going to be. They have to be flawed. They have to be whatever, imperfect. Your job is to make them human. And when he said that, it was such a relief to me that I could carry a sense of responsibility into the world, but I did not have to it could be an awareness without being a weight. And I think that is the way I try to continue to write. At the end of the day, these are characters and they resonate with people, and people find commonalities or similarities with them, and we're all flawed in some way. And so if I keep that in mind, it makes it easier. But when I think too much about, oh my God, what are they gonna think?
Yeah.
It can be too much.
I mean, I feel like just write the book. I've heard that many a time from my agent. But it is like such a nice reminder that, I don't know, I think often as humans too, we want to see like the overview. Well, what's going to happen when this book is done? What's going to happen when I'm like on a talk show and they ask me this question, like what's going to, and you haven't written a word yet. Yeah, that's true. So like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's really easy to kind of get caught in these like ideas of what it will look like.
Yeah.
When really, it's a very solitary thing, writing a book. It's just you and the book. And so there is no audience yet. You just...
And you can't even really think about the audience at all. You have to just get the words on the page.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, because the characters exist already and they are just waiting for you to write them. Yeah, my best friend died via substance use, and that was not something that was known to me. And I had a similar thing of like, I wrote the entire book without talking about it, and I felt like something was like missing.
Yeah.
And my father also struggles with substance use. And so I was just like, I don't want to talk about this. It's not important to the story. But when I read through the manuscript, it felt like there was a big old hole.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my best friend, and she was like, just hear me out. Just write about the drugs. Just see how it feels. And I did, and it just came out, and then everything fit in like a jigsaw puzzle. And I think... it's interesting to like also let the stigmas sit for a bit and like understand that, I mean, with this specific example of substance use, understand that there is still humanity to be had, and there is still a person, and there is still, it is not the totality of someone as society would have us believe. So yeah, I really love the idea of kind of leaving the audience where they belong in the future.
Out there.
And and writing. That's beautiful.
I think that's true.
We've talked a little bit about writing and how it can feel very, very solitary. And I was curious about where you find community as a writer. Do you have a kind of writing group that you go to, or someone in particular?
You know, that has changed over the years. But I have to say, I think having a community of fellow travelers is essential. You have to. It's such a solitary endeavor, and and I think especially as writers, I think if you're a painter, if you're a photographer, if you're a musician, any other artistic discipline, the work is out there for people to see.
Yeah.
You can be in the midst of a painting, but you still have something on the canvas. So if people come and they want to know what you're working on, you can point to it.
Yeah.
As a writer, it's only real to you for so long that people start to think maybe you're not telling the truth. They do. And I'll tell you so the worst thing you can ask a writer is, how's the book? Because that, if it's going well, you can say, oh, it's going great. But if it's not going well, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah, do you really want to hear?
Do you really want to hear this? But the thing that's even worse than that, which I experienced with Queen Sugar, because that took 14 years for me to write, or 11 years, whatever. The worst thing was not if people come to you and say, how's the book? It's when they stop asking.
Oh.
Because then they think, oh, she's, right?
She's writing.
She's
apparently.
writing, right? And that was actually the worst thing, because I was so aware that people they thought I was making it up.
Yeah.
And I would think, no, you don't understand. I'm still in it. It's still real. But I didn't have something to point to.
And sometimes writing is truly just thinking about things. I include that in my billable hours as a writer.
Yes.
Just
sometimes
having
it's
a
just
think.
sitting, thinking,
waiting,
waiting, or working something out. But you don't have that concrete evidence. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why it's nice to have other writers, I think, especially in your life, who you can call to say, oh, this is happening, or whatever. Yeah. And they say, I understand. Yeah,
it's very validating.
It's essential. Yeah.
Do you have I feel like we have a lot of mutual people in between us. I feel like you're in a group with someone I know.
I have. I've had different iterations of writing groups. So when I was in I can go way back. I have been in writers' workshops. I have had writing groups where we share work regularly. We meet once a month and you bring what you've done. I've been in writing groups where we're all working on novels and we only meet when somebody has a novel to share, which means you only meet every 7 years. I've kind of had different iterations of that. I've been a member of the Writers' Grotto in San Francisco. That's a wonderful community.
It is.
Of writers.
I'm on the board now. So
okay, you should tell people what the Grotto is.
The Grotto is a really beautiful collection of writers. We have physical office space in San Francisco. I live here, obviously, so I don't utilize the office space, but we have a lot of, we have teaching offerings, and we also have this really beautiful conference that I was an inaugural participant of called Rooted and Written, and it's specifically for BIPOC, non-white writers, and it's taught by non-white teachers, and it just creates this really special little cozy bubble. And I was an inaugural person, and this year I will be their keynote speaker, which feels like so full circle to think about. But it's a really special place if you're thinking about writing classes. They have lots, and they are mostly online now, post-COVID. But it's a great space to find wonderful. Your people.
And when I started years ago, when I first moved to San Francisco, the Grotto was started by 4 guys who were writing independently at home and decided that they wanted community. And so they came together, and I think they rented an old Victorian, and they each took a room, but they would show up for work every day. And that's the way it started. When I moved to San Francisco in 2003, there were about 15 people, and they had moved from that Victorian to an old veterinary hospital downtown San Francisco. It was on the corner of Van Ness and Market.
Oh, okay.
And it was like a frat house in there. I mean, it was just spit and glued together. But it was this wonderful community. And at that time, it was not particularly diverse. It was mostly white writers. But it was such a welcoming place. And that's when I started going. And that group of 19, or 12, whatever, grew to 19, then it grew to 21, and then we got kicked out of that space because now it's a high-rise building, and then we moved to a place south of Market. And by the time I kind of gave up my office, there were 125 people there.
Yeah.
And it was this wonderful community where people would introduce each other to their agents. We would all have lunch together, you know, if you had an office there. It was the best.
My agent that I have currently, I met kind of through Rooted and Written at the Grotto.
Yeah.
They had like a class that was like how to query an agent, and the agent who was giving that talk ended up passing my manuscript on to my now agent. So yeah.
And that's what you need.
Yeah, you do need that. And it's, I mean, the lit world from the outside anyway, it looks like a bunch of closed doors, and who knows how you get in anywhere. And maybe you're writing a book, and maybe you're writing an essay, but it feels like, what do I do next is often the question. And I feel like in community is where you find those answers, because we got to crowdsource them. Yeah, that's it.
So.
Your second book, We Are Each Other's Harvest. That's your second, correct?
Yes, that's the second.
Is an anthology examining the journey for Black farmers from emancipation to today. Will you talk a little about this project and how it led to the Black Harvest Fund?
Sure. So, because I'd written Queen Sugar, which is fiction, but it's about, again, this young Black woman who looks up and she's inherited this land, sugarcane land, and she has to figure out what she's going to do with this. And so this question of Black people and our connection to land as part of the American narrative was really at the center of that book. And in all of the years that it took me to research Queen Sugar, which meant I had to leave San Francisco and go down to Louisiana, as 4 or 5 times a year, as often as I could find childcare. The one question that I always had was, where are all the Black farmers? I would see white farmers out there, but I could not figure out, knowing I'm in Louisiana, South Louisiana, I could not figure out where all of the Black farmers had gone, sugarcane farmers particularly. And that was, and in my time there, and in the 10, 11 years that I was going back to Louisiana, I only met one Black sugarcane farmer who took me under his wing and really, would treat me as a daughter and teach me when I went there. But I grew up with Little House on the Prairie. I grew up watching the Farm Aid concerts, Save the American Farm, right? And so, to me, I grew up with this idea that farming and having a connection to the soil, having a connection to land ownership and what all of that meant, that was part of the American experience. And to think that Black people somehow had been erased from that narrative in a way that even I was not conscious of as a younger person was interesting to me. And so as I was working on Queen Sugar, that was part of that was the question that I was trying to answer. It's, what does land mean to Black people in this country? Knowing that we had been enslaved to work the land, what does that mean? And so kind of in the wake of Queen Sugar and the reception that that book got and the questions that that sparked in the culture, and the fact that people would come up to me and say, I have land in my family. You know, my great-great-grandfather owned 200 acres of land in, you know, Mississippi, and we still have that land in my family. People were constantly coming up to me sharing those kinds of stories. And I decided that I wanted to try to examine that question and explore that question, but I wanted to do it in a way that was going to be dynamic and that would be engaging, and that I'm not a historian. And so I was like, oh, Lord, I don't want to spend another 10 years trying to write this book. So We Are Each Other's Harvest is a book of photographs, portraits of Black farmers today, because there are many. Not as many as there were. In 1920, there were about 1 million Black farmers, 925,000. In 2017, there were less than 45,000.
A real loss.
Huge loss. And when you think that in the 1920s, Black people in this country owned about 14 million acres of land.
Wow.
Because we understood after emancipation what land meant. Today, we own like 4 million acres. And so this question of what happened?
Yeah.
How did this happen? Was what led me to write this nonfiction book, where I have these portraits of farmers who are farming today, young people, old people, up in Alaska, down in South Carolina, upstate New York. But then also it's essays and first-person narratives and poems and all of these different elements, because I wanted to bring the reader in and have them explore this question in a way that was going to be like a kaleidoscope, you know, and that looked at these questions through all kinds of interdisciplinary art. So there's art, there's photography, there's poetry in the book. It's just lots of things trying to look at this question. And it was the only way I could figure out to write the book, was to kind of situate myself as a curator and pull in these different elements to try to explore that question. Yeah.
And the Black Harvest Fund came from this work?
Right, and so the Black Harvest Fund is a fund that I created in the process of writing the book, We Are Each Other's Harvest. And I should also say that the title, We Are Each Other's Harvest, comes from a Gwendolyn Brooks poem. Gwendolyn Brooks was one of the preeminent African-American poets, and she wrote this poem called Paul Robeson. And the last stanza of the poem says, we are each other's harvest, we are each other's business, we are each other's magnitude and bond. And when I was thinking about a title for the book, and I kind of had that as one of the, you know, little poems in the book, I looked at that and I thought, that's the title. Because what it said to me was, we are in this together, and we have to take care of each other, and we will move forward together. And it just kind of expressed the kind of essence of the book. And the Black Harvest Fund, to answer your question, is a fund that I set up that people can donate to, it still exists. And then all of the donations go to organizations that help young black farmers in particular, whether it's, you know, donating to an organization up here in Richmond called Urban Tilth, where Daria Robinson is working with urban farmers, or, you know, the money goes to the Southern Federation of, you know, Land Cooperatives, which is, it just goes everywhere to help Black people doing this
The QR
work.
codes,
Yeah.
yonder, it is
So,
there. You can donate.
Yeah. And it was my way of putting my money where my mouth was, and not just giving Black and brown people a platform to tell their stories, but to actually make a concrete contribution.
Yeah.
So that's what that is.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
There are some black farms here in Sonoma also. There's Earthseed it's in Sonoma, correct?
Yeah, it's in
Earthseed?
yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can also patronize them. What else should we talk about? I have other notes, but I'm like wondering if there's anything that you really wanted to talk about.
I mean, so many things. What would you guys like to hear?
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know.
Yeah, I'm interested. So it took 11 years for you to write this book?
Yes.
But, like, did you write the book and take 11 years to edit it? Or did you, take 11 years to write it and then go back to what you had written 11 years earlier? And what is that?
So the process, and I'd be curious to know what the process. So the process for me is start at the beginning and march my way forward, just till I get to the end. Because typically I have kind of, it's not a clear picture, but I have like a feeling or a vague picture of what I know the ending is going to look like or is going to feel like. And so I'm writing my way towards that feeling. So if you were to come to my house and look in my writing office, you would see probably, at this point, 13 or 14 binders that are different versions of that novel.
This is so fascinating because mine,
Where
no
I am-
binders in my life. But
Well, that's the way I had to organize it, because it's all around you, that as you're writing, the more you write, the more the book becomes real, and the more the characters become real, and the more the world becomes real, and you're kind of sitting at your desk and you're looking around from, on the side of you, and the world is becoming a solid thing. And so I would start at the beginning and just keep marching my way forward. And, with each iteration of the book, you cut things out, you start over, you throw things out. And so I would get to the end and, I would start over. And it wasn't, I'm making it sound much more organized than it is. But that is the overall process, right? And so you look up and the years have passed. And that's the other thing. I can remember being 30, being like, I'm going to be published by the time I'm 35. And then 35 comes and goes, and you're like, well, okay, I'll be published by the time I'm 40. And then 40 comes and goes. And then it's like, okay, well, now I'm going to just stop counting. I just am going to write this thing until it's finished. And so the process for me was, you write it, you're sharing it with people, you're getting feedback, you're going back, you're reworking things. And so each binder, same story, same basic character, but it changes over time. And it finally gets to the point where you think you've done the very best you can do. And typically that's when you start sending it out into the world, looking for agents, which is its own horror story of pain and trauma. Because it's hard, And in my case, I started working on this book, and I'll share this little story. So I started Queen Sugar in 1999, and pretty much kept my head down and just kept writing it until 2009. And at that point, I'd moved up here, my kids were growing up, and I sent the book out to a few agents, which is the next step in the process, and got nothing but rejections, and was heartbroken, devastated. I mean, 2009 was the worst summer of my life, hands down, because I had been laboring over this story, trying to craft it, trying to nurture that little seed for 10 years, and then got nothing but rejections. and had to decide at that point, well, now what am I going to do? That's when people stopped asking about the book, you know? And I remember I went away to a writing residency, and it was so painful for me I could not even open the book to look at what I'd written, because all I saw was 10 years of my life, failure. But I still, there was this little belief that there was something there. And I just had to craft it and start again. And so after about 5 days of being at this residency, I finally just opened up the book and kind of spread it out on the floor and thought, oh, okay, well, I'll start again. And you start again.
But you don't start from zero when you start again.
No, because you have something.
Yeah, right.
And ultimately, having something is better than nothing. The worst is to have a blank page. That is the worst.
That is the worst.
Why do you think it's the worst? I agree with you, but I'd love to hear.
I can't force it. I can't make myself. It comes, for me, it feels very spiritual. I'm called to do it or I'm not. And so a blank page to me speaks to the fact that I am not, whatever is going on in my life, children, family, any number of things could be happening that is meaning that I'm blocked and I can't access that part of myself. So that it freaks me out for that reason.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating. I am not a type A person. I married a type A person. So I'm like, binders, a beautiful desk. I write in my bed. Because it's when the door is shut, my children know that I am to be left alone.
Yes.
And I love my bed. And I read that Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who wrote Fleabag, wrote that in her bed. And I was like, no, if it's good enough for her, it's good enough for me. But I don't have binders, but I do this kind of mad thing towards the end where I pin it to the wall like some kind of disgraced detective trying to figure shit out. And it looks kind of mad, but there's something.
You can see it.
You can see it.
I think the point is you can see it.
Yeah. And working on a screen, you don't get the full scope of the thing.
Right.
So that's why I do it. But I write the ending first. And the ending normally stays the same. It doesn't normally deviate. And then I figure out the puzzle pieces to get there. And sometimes it's just, I write on my notes app on my phone a lot too, because I have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old, and sometimes we're in the park and I'm like, let me just get this down.
Yeah.
And then things linger in my notes app, and then a year later I look at it and I'm like, oh, that's what she says to this guy when that's why I wrote it. It feels very much like, I don't know if anyone ever played video games here, but sometimes on video games, on a map, when you first start the video game, your map is very small and it's like foggy areas around you, and you only discover what's underneath the fog as you explore them. And that to me is what writing a book feels like. The whole world is there. I just have to venture out and give it the oxygen to breathe it in.
Yeah. And understand how to make the connections.
Exactly.
And sometimes you don't know what those things mean.
Mm-hmm. And you can't force it either.
Exactly. Until you get there. And then it's like, oh, I see how this connects to this.
Yeah.
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 It's a very strange process.
It is strange. And it does feel like, for me, my husband's a musician and he often talks about playing music. He's a drummer. He'll go and play drums in this rehearsal space. And sometimes he'll come back 3 hours later and I'm like, where were you? And he's like, I just was in the zone. He just leaves his body and he could just be figuring something out for hours, and he's lost in it. And the only thing that gets me close to that feeling is when I'm jigsawing these little fragments together and understanding how they speak to a larger story.
Yeah.
It's really satisfying.
Yeah.
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 I'm curious, the Queen Sugar, when you were talking about the connection to the land, which is obviously universal, around the planet. And my first thought was how easily that becomes a metaphor for culture.
Totally.
And so when you were writing, how intentional was making that integration? How much of it did you fight it? Because those can easily be two completely separate things, but they can also just kind of tie in seamlessly. So did you struggle with that, or was it?
It was, I didn't struggle with it. You know, I'll say this. Sometimes when you have you have a sense of what something is, you have to hold it very lightly. I'll speak for myself. So you have this kind of awareness of what this thing means. But you have to, for me, I have to kind of hold it to the side, because if I'm too aware, this is what I'm trying to say, right? Then the work stops being organic, and it starts to feel stiff and tight and too finger waggy, right? Too forced. And because at the end of the day, I'm still trying to make something beautiful, and I'm trying to make something that's like it's like it has a shape, but it's not like a body, you know? And so I have to hold those ideas kind of lightly as I'm creating the story and the characters, and I'm just letting the characters do what the characters are going to do. And, you know, because the themes and the ideas kind of rise up, if I'm doing it right, those themes will rise up in the air, in the atmosphere of the book. And so, like, this awareness of land, I was conscious of it when I was writing, but I was also trying to keep the whole universe of the book in my head. And so it wasn't until after many, many drafts when I thought, okay, this is basically the story, that I could step back and see some of these things like from the 30,000-foot view, right? I could look down at the book and say, oh, that's what that is, right? Oh, that's the question that I was asking there. And sometimes I couldn't even see it. Sometimes other people would read the book, trusted readers, and they would say, oh, you know, oh, this is a theme that I see. And then I'm like, oh, right. So I think a lot of times in any kind of creative process, it's not like that you're in a dream state, but you are like in the zone, and you're just trying to get the thing on paper, and you're not really thinking about what does it mean. You figure that out later, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between, you talked about your journey in writing Queen Sugar, and you talked about, you know, I guess, inspiration for your book, but what is it like, you know, once you've had a book that's been published and then you're going on to another book? I assume you have, you know, if you're working with a publisher, you have deadlines or certain things that they want you to or certain, I guess, benchmarks and stuff that they want you to meet. How does that impact the process of writing when you get to that point? Does that question make sense?
Well, so with this book that's over there, it was published by a small publisher in New York. They published that book, and while that book was being published, I was writing the second one. But I never really felt like I was being surveilled or watched or like expected to churn anything out until I was ready to share that I was working on a book and this was what it was about. But I felt like it lived with me until I was ready to bring it to my agent. And then, just logistically speaking, then my agent read it and decided if it was time. We did a bunch of edits. And then we sent it on submission to publishing houses after that. So
this was the
second book, yeah. And so that book, because my first book was a memoir, it maybe is different for you because you're a more cemented writer, I feel. I don't know if that's true or my insecurities. But I had to finish the whole manuscript. There are many writers on this planet who can write a synopsis and have a publishing deal on the table, but I had to finish the whole thing to prove that I could tell a story. And so until it was there, no one else really saw it except for my trusted readers and my agent. What about you?
So Queen Sugar I had to write. As a first-time novelist, no one's going to buy your book on an idea. Mm-hmm. You have to write it. Mm-hmm. And that took as long as it took, you know. The nonfiction book, We Are Each Other's Harvest, an editor actually came to me. And she was a nonfiction editor, so it was like I was going from this world over here to this world over here. And she wanted to work with me, but her original idea, which she pitched to me, was what she called at the time a TV tie-in book, meaning I think she had an idea that I would be able to write a book that tied into the television show that came from the novel. And what I had to tell her was, I can't deliver that book because, you know, my access to the television show is limited. I can go to the set, but I cannot promise you an interview with Oprah Winfrey. Can't do that. Or the cat, whatever. And so we kind of went around and around, and we were kind of talking about other ideas. And finally, my agent said to me, well, what would you write if you could write anything? And I thought about it, and I thought, what would I write? If I could write anything, what would I write? And that's when different things had happened, you know, in my life. I'd met all these young Black farmers who were doing this amazing work, and I thought, you know, if I were going to do anything, I would probably write a book where I, you know, let these people have a platform to tell their stories. And I love art, I love photography, I love poetry. And so I thought, I'll do a book, and it's going to be about Black people and land. But if I'm honest, I would hear myself tell people about We Are Each Other's Harvest, and I would say to them, like, you know, I think it needs to have photography in it. And I think it needs to have poetry in it. And I think it needs to have, like, articles. And I would hear myself say these things, and I would watch the person, the look on the person's face who I was talking to, and they're like, and I would think, this sounds like a shit show. This sounds nuts. And nobody understood what I was thinking, because I didn't have a clear vision, I just had like a gut feeling. And so I thought, let me try it. Let me just see what happens. And so I started just assembling these pieces, and sure enough, the winds started to gather. And I could see that it was becoming a thing. Now, I did not tell my editor this idea. I just did it. And I knew, and so it came, I'd been working on the book for about a year, traveling around with a photographer, taking these pictures, interviewing all these people, kind of went down the rabbit hole, and it came time to send in like sample chapters. And I'm thinking, oh Lord, how am I going to convince this editor that what I have created is worth publishing? And so I ended up printing. Okay, so I have a friend, Erica Demon, and I don't know do any of you remember when the 1619 Project came out in the New York Times? There was that special insert, and it had these beautiful photographs of like a cane knife and a basket woven by enslaved people and a like shackles. My friend Erica Demon took those pictures. And so she and I were having lunch one day, and I was telling her, I think I've got to turn in some sample chapters, and I think I'll just go to Kinko's and like print out some of the portraits of the farmers in the book. And she's like, what do you mean, Kinko's? She's like, I'll print them for you. So she printed out the portraits. I chose some of the poems. I chose some of the articles. And I was so proud of myself. I went to like Bed Bath & Beyond and bought this beautiful box, like 8.5 by 11, wrapped in cloth that had a beautiful satin ribbon on it. And I put all of these elements, including the portraits, in the book. And I sent it to my editor because I knew she had to experience the book the way I was imagining the book. And sure enough, when she got it, she's like, what is this? But if you come across the book, if you decide to buy it or you see it in the bookstore, whatever, you'll see that it is like art. Because that's what I wanted it to be, And I was lucky enough that the publisher really got behind it, and they made this beautiful thing. They made this book that it's just beautiful. But it was all because I just was like, I have to just trust my instincts about what this is. And I'm not going to question it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do it.
It can be, I feel like once you bring the industry in to your book, things can change quickly. You have to really know what it is before you let those people get in.
Yes, because too many cooks will just ruin it.
They'll be like, what if?
Yeah.
Instead, that's interesting.
So, anyway, it's a long-winded answer, but I think that's probably one of the big takeaways from what we both do is you just have to kind of silence the critics. Don't look at the clock. Don't look at the calendar. Don't count the years that have passed. Just do it. And see what happens,
That's a really beautiful answer.
Yeah. Oh, 2 minutes. We're getting the 2 minutes.
Do we have any other questions?
Yes. I actually sort of collect children's books, and particularly diverse characters and all, and just seeing the change of books, well, from when I was young, in terms of the characters and the situation, and the topics and all of that. So have you seen a change in the accessibility of people of color, Black authors, in terms of what they're able to do, or just more, some people could say, well, there were Black authors because they weren't writing. And it's like, okay, well, no, I don't think that's it, right? But it's the accessibility. So I don't know if you've noticed that. Well, I think you're a little older than she is, but
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing for me that's so exciting now is you have so many more authors, Black authors, who are getting their work published, whose work is out there in the world. I mean, an array of topics, genres, subject matter. I mean, you just have so much more. And I will say that's not even close to probably a third of what people are actually creating. These are just the people who've run the gauntlet and who have gotten over the finish line. But what I love is that you have everyone from a Jessamine Ward, to an N.K. Jemisin who's writing fantasy. You've got history. It's such a rich landscape. And then you throw poets in there.
Oh, yeah, we've got loads of poets.
benefits us all, right?
It does. It does. I really believe it does, because it's, you have people who are helping us make sense of the world. I was listening to, on the way up here, a podcast with a younger writer who wrote this book, Black guy who wrote this book called Great Expectations, about, it's a novel about like a young guy who joins a political campaign. It's kind of like Obama's, because the author was part of Obama's campaign. But it talks about his disillusionment, and like what that's like. And And I was just listening to this, and I was thinking, you know, this is amazing that you have writers who are writing about all aspects of life. And then, like, recently I went to hear Percival Everett, who wrote James. Have you guys read James? Ah! A reinterpretation of Huck Finn.
Oh, no way.
Brilliant. I'm talking, who agrees with me who's read James?
Oh,
Would you
I'm
say
gonna
that
read
that
it.
book is...
Yeah, they say you should read it with Huck Finn, and Huck Finn pales, you know.
It pales. This book is so imaginative and so, like, brilliant. That's the only way I can. And then, listen, if you don't read the book, listen to the audiobook, which is also fantastic.
Does he read it?
No, but the guy who reads it is so good. He's so good. And
We got some shopping to do.
I'm telling you, that book, James, is a masterpiece. I really believe it is a masterpiece. And funny, you know? Yes, and you think, there are all these minds out there. American fiction.
American
yes.
fiction is great.
Yes, yes, yeah. And that's what's exciting, is to be part of that conversation, to know that our work is out there, you know,
In variety.
in variety.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
I will say that I do, you know, it is wonderful, and I think often we can be tempted to be like, well, we did it. But there are still hurdles like, oh my gosh, what's the writer's name who wrote the movie version of her book just came out
Yes,
with
I know what you
Anne
mean.
Hathaway.
Yes.
She's a black author. She wrote a book about an older woman who has a love affair with a younger man who's a pop star. And she initially had written a version of that story with black protagonists and could not sell it, and switched them to white and then sold
And
it,
then
and now
sold
it's a movie.
Yes.
And so
and that's
think-
the other part.
Yeah, I really want to celebrate, and I feel like it's also important to hold the not done yetness
Yes, that
of
is true.
of the lit world, and I think often our stories can be trendy, or you know of the moment, and sometimes those things can be dropped.
Yeah.
But I do
And
feel
that's
like
a
we have,
reality.
yeah,
That's a reality
yeah.
too.
But we have really, really exciting authors. I think about, did you read Chain Gang All Stars by Nana Kwame
No,
Adjei-Bremer?
I've heard it, but I've heard of it, but I have not read it yet.
Oh, it's really, really brilliant. It's called Chain Gang All Stars. He's like a kind of dystopian writer, and it's about as if the prison industrial complex was actually for profit, and it was almost like entertainment TV. And you could choose between a life sentence, or you could just be in this fight to the death for 7 years, and then get your freedom at the
Wow.
end of it. But he's a really phenomenal writer. He had a
I've
short
heard
story
about it.
collection
I've heard
called
that book,
Friday
yeah.
Black.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have so many
Yeah.
fabulous people, including
Yeah.
Natalie
yeah.
here.
And including Eirinie.
You should buy her book. Thank you.
So I want to thank everybody for coming today, but I especially want to thank one of our hosts today, Faith and Gloria from Petaluma Blacks for Community Development. They are our sponsors today for this event. Thank you all for coming. The authors are here if you guys got questions. I'm going to let you walk around and
All right.
breathe, and you guys can ask questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.